Hi guys, welcome back to Authentically Alexis. Today we're going to be talking about some autistic traits and signs that I had when I was a little girl. So just a little backstory in case you haven't seen any of my other videos. Autism in female presents a lot differently than autism in males do. And a lot of females go under the radar because the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, does not include anything for females. The studies they did in the DSM-5 for the diagnostic criteria for autism were based off of one demographic and one demographic only, and that was white adolescent males. So as you can imagine, a lot of women and people of color did not get the diagnoses they needed early on. This is leading to a lot of people of color and a lot of females being diagnosed today later on in life, which can be really problematic. So unfortunately, this means that since 100% of their studies were based off of white adolescent males as their subjects, a lot of us went under the radar and were not diagnosed at an early age. It's very important for us to be diagnosed at an early age because, for one, it can help us understand why we view the world differently. It can help us understand why we feel different than neurotypicals or allistic people. And being diagnosed later on in life, like me, can really send you into kind of like an identity crisis. Knowing that you're an autistic adult can really give you a lot of clarity. It can really help you to understand the way that you think and the way that you view the world. And if you don't know at a young age, that means that there's years of your life that you haven't had the support you've needed. You've probably been too hard on yourself and not given yourself enough patience and love and understanding. And even though autism is just one part of you, it's a huge part of you if you're autistic because it's the way that your brain functions and perceives the world. So it's super important that we educate people on what autism looks like in girls and in other people that are not just little white boys, essentially. Okay, now a little bit of my personal backstory. So in second grade, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and in my file, it said that I also had an unspecified learning disability. This is because, unfortunately, the diagnostician that was doing these assessments on me did not know how to diagnose autism. She was not qualified to identify autism in individuals. So she saw something there, but she just didn't quite know what it was at that point. Probably because my traits did not match up perfectly with the traits in the DSM-5, because I'm a girl. Autism was again brought up by my therapist when I was about 16 years old. I was getting therapy for CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, for some traumas that happened during my teen years. So as you can imagine, I kind of had bigger problems to worry about. And when she mentioned some of my facial tics and some of my stimming behaviors and said that they could be signs of autism, I completely just went right over it and didn't give it any weight. I didn't pay it any mind. I was in a state of crisis. But I really wish that we did explore and pursue the possibility that I was autistic back then because I think it would have saved me a lot of heartache and it would have given me like a better understanding of myself at an earlier age. So then fast forward to 21. When I was 21, I was getting theta brainwave therapy to help with my CPTSD symptoms. Now looking back, I know a lot of those symptoms were autistic meltdowns. And in the middle of one of my sessions, my therapist looked at me and said, "So are you officially diagnosed autistic?" And I was completely taken aback and shocked and confused. I said, "No, I'm not diagnosed as autistic." I thought maybe she had the wrong file or something or got me confused with a different one of her clients, but she didn't. She told me that she was almost 100% certain that I had autism. And what did I do? Did I accept that with grace and admit that I knew nothing about autism and ask her for more information? No, I fired her immediately and never went back. So that just goes to show how little of an understanding I had on autism. I had no idea that that could be me. Now fast forward a year. So I had a little bit of time to ponder this, to do some research, and naturally I fell into a huge deep dive into research, looking at statistics and cataloging data, all about autism. And in hindsight, I can see now that that was the beginning of my budding special interest for autism. And I was fascinated because everything that I read, all of the DSM-5 criteria, like the 3 main components that you have to hit certain markers under in order to get a diagnosis, and realizing how much I identified with so much of this. So I compiled a bunch of information. I wrote down stories from my childhood. I started writing down all my symptoms like now that I had, and I ended up taking them to my doctor and ultimately getting diagnosed with autism at the age of 22. So when I knew that I was autistic, this is when like the big identity crisis happened. This is very common amongst late diagnosed autistic people, and it's this interesting mixture of shock and relief at the same time. You kind of start to have so much more sympathy and understanding for your younger self, and you rewind and look at things through a completely different lens. So now that that's out of the way, on to some of my early signs of autism as a young girl. Now, I also want to give a disclaimer. I'm not a doctor, so please don't take everything that I say with a grain of salt, first of all. Second of all, if you have some of these symptoms, it does not automatically mean you're autistic. A lot of these things are also displayed by allistic people, which means non-autistic, but they're just to like a different extreme. Okay, so starting when I was a baby, when I was like a toddler, a lot of the things that were different about me were actually strengths. I was either hitting my milestones on time or like way ahead of time. So that's why nothing raised concern for my mom. She was just like, oh, my baby's ahead of the curve. I crawled at 6 months and walked at 7, which was quite early. And then as far as my speech, language, communication, that is where I really started to excel at an extremely early age. I had an advanced vocabulary, and at the age of 1, I was carrying on full back and forth conversations with adults and would talk to them about concepts that were way beyond my 1 year. I immediately had an excellent memory for songs, and I knew my ABCs in Spanish and English by the age of 2. By the age of 1, I could count to 10 in both Spanish and English as well. I was a very hyperactive little kid, and I was always seen climbing on things. On top of refrigerators, I would climb up doorways, like kind of put my legs and arms out and climb up the doorways. And this is also when my obsession with animals started. I loved stimming in a vestibular way, so I loved it when my mom would flip me upside down. I loved spinning, I loved jumping, just all of these big body movements. That's the way that I stemmed primarily as a little girl. Another way that I loved to stem was watching objects spin and bounce. So my first big special interest was with balls. I had a huge collection of bouncy balls. Oh, my cat just knocked my tripod. I had a huge collection of bouncy balls. In my car seat, my cup holder, you could kind of put something in the cup holder and like flip it over and it would fall underneath the car seat. So my mom kept having to take my car seat out, and every time that she would take it out, there would be like a pile of bouncy balls that I had stashed under there. And I was always seen with one in each hand. In our house, we also had one of those door stops like on the walls, like the springy things where if the door flings open, it doesn't hit the wall and damage it. And it was one that was like a spring where if you flicked it, it would kind of like boing and bounce up and down. And I could sit there and do that and watch it for such a long time. I loved being pushed in my stroller, and people often had a hard time with my energy. I did not pick up on social cues of when I was overwhelming or annoying people, and often, instead of exchanging pleasantries, hi, my name's Alexis, what's your name, that kind of thing, I would just walk up to someone and go straight into like a Disney monologue or start singing The Little Mermaid to them, which was kind of my first sign of masking. So instead of copying people at this age, I would just copy and paste things from Disney characters. And then as I was growing, I really just seemed to be happy playing by myself. I could play next to other kids, but playing by myself and being in my own little world was something that I was perfectly content doing. When I would get mad about something or overwhelmed in the grocery store, I would clench my fists really tight until my face got really red and grit my teeth and kind of make this sound. It's almost a sound of like clearing your throat, but like a long like growl almost. And by the age of 3, my strong suits or my autistic superpowers were definitely with art and music. I could completely recite Disney songs perfectly, match the keys perfectly, and not mess up a single word. But if someone sang a Disney song and they did mess up a word, like switched it out for another word, I would be the first one to tell them. And with drawing, by the age of 3, I could draw really elaborate 3-dimensional pictures. My mom still has some of them that are dated from when I was 3 and 4 years old. One of them is like of a little boy in blue jeans and a sweatshirt bending down and tying his shoes. So art and music were definitely my autistic superpowers. So as a toddler, I also did something called hand leading, which is instead of verbally telling my mom, come with me so I can show you this over here, I would just take her hand and lead her around the house by her hand to show her what I wanted to show her. Another sort of vestibular stim that I loved to do was hang upside down. So I was constantly climbing up trees, climbing on the highest parts of the furniture in the house, and hanging upside down off of anything that I could. I also had a very overactive imagination. As I got a little bit older, as far as like playtime, I still really enjoyed and preferred to play with myself, but I also enjoyed collecting things. I had tons of collections. One of them was with my littlest pet shops. Those were my favorite toys. And unlike most allistic kids who would like pick up the dolls or the figurines and make them talk to each other and play with them like that, that was not my thing. I would much rather just line them up in a row and organize them by color or animal type or size. And I would set up these elaborate scenes with the houses and with the houses and animals and just admire them. And I didn't want anyone to touch them. I just wanted them to be the way that I set them. I also had really random collections, like every fortune that I ever got in a fortune cookie, I had a box of those. I collected pencil lead. So anytime my graphite or colored pencil would break, I would put it in my little pencil lead container and save it. I also had a bottle cap collection, a bead collection, a rock and like stone and crystal collection. I just loved collecting things and organizing them into their own little spaces. So again, my first collection was with bouncy balls, and then it just, I just started collecting everything. In fact, I loved bouncy balls so much that my first word that started off my advanced vocabulary was ball, and my second word was balloon. I also collected erasers, like the little eraser animals, but I would never use them. I just wanted them in my collection. I also really attached like feelings to things. So I also had a collection of stuffed animals, and I felt like even though I knew they couldn't feel, if I accidentally dropped one or something like that, I would apologize to it. And I always liked to set up my bed with all my pillows and all of my stuffed animals like perfectly every day. I loved my stuffed animals so much, and I attached a lot of emotion to them. So I mentioned my first experience with masking was kind of copying and pasting Disney characters. I would act like whatever character I was hyper-focusing on at the time. The Little Mermaid was a huge special interest of mine, and often right upon meeting someone, I would just want to sing them all the songs from Little Mermaid because I loved her. So I figured, if I could be like Ariel, then other people would like and accept me too. This got a little bit more cringy when I moved into middle school. So in middle school, I discovered Avril Lavigne, and I loved her. I thought she was so cool, and I figured if she was famous and all these people loved her and liked her music and liked her style, so what is the logical thing to do to fit in? Well, in little unknowingly autistic Alexis's mind, I thought that I should just take a sharp right turn into being Avril Lavigne because I liked her and other people clearly liked her. So if I just became like Avril Lavigne overnight, that would surely work to help me fit in middle school. So I'm gonna insert a picture of what I looked like before and then what I looked like basically the next day trying to look like Avril Lavigne. I know. So throughout school, I just continued to do this. I tried to camouflage and fit in by acting like my neurotypical peers. And another sign of autism that I had when I was little was I stopped taking naps around the age of 1, and I actually was kicked out of multiple daycares for trying to wake the other kids up because that's when my sleep problems started. Finally, around the age of 5, to help my mom mitigate these sleep issues, she got me kind of like this oil and water color paint projector. It was basically a projector, and it was kind of like a lava lamp, and you could see the patterns of the oil bubbles moving, and there were a bunch of different colors, and it projected on my ceiling. And so that really helped me to kind of regulate myself and to help soothe me to sleep. Otherwise, when we were living with my great-grandmother at the time, if I was sleeping with her, she would have to put her leg across me, or like kind of gently hold my arms down with her arm to hold me in place because I just could not stop moving. And when she did this, I fell asleep almost instantly. I just had an issue regulating myself. Another thing I always loved to do as a child was spin. I talked about this earlier, but it was one of my favorite stims. And when I went to a small like community school, it was from kindergarten to 3rd grade, whenever we were playing group activities, it wasn't my favorite thing to join in with the group. Like I said, I really liked self-play. Well, the teachers kind of caught on to this, and if the whole group was playing dodgeball or doing other physical activities, I would much rather just be by myself looking straight up through the skylight and spinning in circles the entire class period. So eventually they just let me do that because they could see that it was a lot more of value to me than playing with the rest of the kids. Another sort of issue that I had as a child was it took me a long time to potty train, and then when I was potty trained, it took me a long time to stop wetting the bed, which is another kind of typical thing with young autistic children as well. Then around middle school, the social pressures began to hit me a little bit harder. I couldn't really get away with being like super different anymore. That's kind of when the bullying started, and I would stim uncontrollably because of the anxiety and not being able to regulate myself and handle the social pressures. So I used to think that these were tics, and I do think that I have had tics before, but I think they're more of stimming actually. So I would move my hands and wrists a lot, kind of like this, just be popping my fingers and popping my wrists constantly. And as everyone probably knows, middle school, particularly middle school girls, can be quite ruthless. And if everyone is seemingly acting normal, fitting into their groups, and there's one person walking around doing repetitive hand and finger motions over and over again, it's going to draw attention. I also had a lot of facial stimming that I would do, just kind of a lot of strange body movements that were not typical. And so the bullying got really bad. I'm going to insert a picture right here of my first day of 8th grade. And when I look at this picture, I have a lot of emotion attached to it because I know how I felt at the time. Going to school was not my favorite thing. I was different. I saw the world differently, and I acted differently than my peers. And at times the bullying was really bad, and the jokes that they would make about me I didn't really understand, especially with the boys when they would kind of joke around with me. I didn't know if they were being serious or not. There was a lot of it's a time where a lot of kids are learning sarcasm, and that is something that does not come naturally to me. I love using sarcasm now because I know kind of the rules for it, and being autistic, if you can assign something rules, you can typically learn it, but it's just not something that came naturally to me at the correct age, if that makes sense. Another thing that I experienced as a child was sensory issues. So I was primarily sensory seeking, but there were some things that I was sensory avoidant about, and one of those things was sound. I was terrified of the sound of a chainsaw, the sound of a vacuum cleaner, or the sound of loud, like public toilets flushing. So when I was 5 and I went trick-or-treating with my cousins, that is like the one and only time that I can really think of that I eloped. So we were going down this alley, there was a haunted house, and in the haunted house, someone had like a chainsaw noise. I don't know if it was a real chainsaw or what it was, but it was so loud and scary and sent me into such a panic that I actually broke apart from my group of cousins and their parents and ran into the dark alleyway and hid. And when my mom was vacuuming, I would typically plug my ears. And then at school, if I was going to the bathroom in the middle of class and I was the only one in the bathroom, I would flush the toilet and then plug my ears and run out of the bathroom immediately to get away from the sound. I was also diagnosed at a young age with dyslexia, and I struggled with numbers and letters. When I would look at numbers or letters on a page, my mind would very often switch them, and so even though I could understand the concepts of what I was learning, it was hard because I would accidentally write down the wrong number or write my letters backwards for a really long time when I was little. Some positives that I want to say is that I was a great friend. I was very loyal. I was extremely outgoing and creative. I was a great artist and I loved to sing. Looking back at my younger self, especially having children now and seeing myself in them, I was really a joyous little girl. But there were areas that I struggled in and I just didn't know why. I didn't have the vocabulary or the understanding, so I really just felt like an alien in a world that I didn't belong in. I felt like my internal dialogue and the work that I had to do to fit in socially and to regulate myself was way different than what anyone else experienced. So in middle school, when I was dealing with this bullying, I was really trying to learn how to suppress my tics. So I started learning how to hide them first, which is goes along with masking. So if I was talking to someone or around people, I would just turn my head so that they couldn't see my face, or turn to the side so they couldn't see my hands or the front of my body, and kind of turn away from people when I felt like I needed to tic or when I needed to stim. And then when I got home, I felt like that was kind of the time that I could let it out. I felt like I was suppressing and hiding my stems all throughout the day at school. So at home, I really needed to feel comfortable. Well, I'm not going to go into details because I just don't think this is the place, and I don't know, maybe I will in the future, but I just am not ready yet. A person who was living in my household, it wasn't my mom, but a person who was living in my household actually was kind of bullying me at home too. This was an adult, and he would say things that were not so nice when my mother was around, and use not so nice language toward me. And he would often stop me from stimming because it was an annoyance to him. Now, he did struggle with his own demons, and he also did not, he wasn't aware of what autism is and why it was so important for me to do that to help self-regulate. But he would often, if I would be making any vocal like stems or anything like that, he would just tell me to stop and that it was unnecessary and annoying. So it was really hard because my safe haven at home, I still couldn't even like let myself be me. So that's just a little bit of what comes to mind. There's so many other things, so many fun, like hilarious stories of when I was like a really little kid and what I did in my autistic self. But I don't want to make this video super long. My next video, or in a future video, I do plan on talking about my teenage years, which is where things took a way darker turn. And where some of my trauma comes from. I'm not going to go into details about that, but just speaking specifically from where I was mentally, having to do with my autistic traits. Okay guys, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for coming and listening to my story. Thank you so much for everyone who's subscribed already. If you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it, and I think that maybe you can find some of this content helpful or you can resonate with it, and I really, really want to keep building this community. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.